15 minutes. That's all Harriet Tubman had before she'd fall unconscious and 11 people would die. The dogs were closing in through the eastern shore woods, their chains rattling against frozen branches. It was 2 a.m. on a freezing February night in 1854, and Harriet's narcolepsy was about to kill them all. If her eyes closed for even 30 seconds, the bloodhounds would find them, and what she did next to stay awake would shock even her. The overseer's weight had cracked her skull years ago. Now her body shut down without warning. Just when people needed her most, sleep attacked. Behind her, 11 frightened souls moved through the underbrush like ghosts. There was Samuel, a blacksmith whose hands were made for iron but tonight would carry freedom. Mary, clutching her 3-year-old daughter Sarah, who hadn't made a sound in hours. Mary still carried Sarah's little rag doll in her coat pocket, the only toy they'd brought from home. Old Thomas, whose arthritis made every step agony but who refused to slow the group down. 2 teenage brothers, Marcus and David, who'd never been more than 5 miles from their plantation. A pregnant woman named Ruth, her belly round under her tattered shawl. And 6 others, all trusting Harriet with their lives. They were still 2 miles from the safe house, and Harriet could feel her eyelids getting heavier with each step. The barking was getting closer. Slave catchers with their bloodhounds, following the scent trail through the frozen woods. Leading them was Jake Morrison, the bounty hunter who'd dragged back more runaways than any man in Maryland. His cold eyes had memorized every face on every wanted poster. If she fell asleep now, if she lost consciousness for even a minute, Morrison would find them all, dragged back in chains. Some would be beaten to death as examples. Others would disappear forever. Sleep was winning. Her vision started to blur. The trees around her seemed to sway, even though there was no wind. This was how it always began. First the heaviness, then the blurred vision, then the overwhelming need to sleep that felt like drowning. Harriet bit down hard on her tongue, tasting blood. The sharp pain jolted her awake for a few more seconds. "Moses," whispered Samuel from behind her. They all called her Moses, the woman who led her people to freedom. "Moses, you all right? You're walking funny." Harriet forced herself to straighten up. She couldn't let them see her weakness. These people had given up everything to follow her. They'd left behind spouses, children, parents, everything they'd ever known, because they believed she could get them to freedom. She'd made 19 trips before this one, 19 successful rescues, never lost a single person. A chain rattled somewhere in the darkness. That record couldn't end tonight. "I'm fine," she whispered back, though her words slurred slightly. "Keep moving, we're almost there." But they weren't almost there, and she wasn't fine. The sleep attack was getting stronger. The dogs barked again, closer now. Chain links clinked against trees, branches snapped under heavy boots. Maybe half a mile behind them. Harriet tried to calculate. At their current pace, with old Thomas limping and Ruth struggling with her pregnancy, the catchers would reach them in 20 minutes, maybe 15. But the safe house was still an hour away through this dense forest. Her knees buckled slightly, and she caught herself against a tree trunk. The bark was rough against her palm, and she pressed hard, letting the pain keep her alert. Behind her she could hear Mary whispering comfort to little Sarah, who was starting to whimper softly. That's when Harriet Tubman realized she was out of options. She could feel the sleep coming like a tide she couldn't hold back. Her body was shutting down whether she wanted it to or not. In a few minutes she'd be unconscious on the forest floor while 11 innocent people stood around helplessly, waiting to be captured. Now she was out of time. Harriet reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small knife, the one she used to cut through briars and rope. In the moonlight filtering through the bare branches, the blade gleamed sharp and cold. She'd never used it on herself before, but tonight was different. Tonight staying awake wasn't just about staying alive. It was about keeping her promise to these people who trusted her with everything. She pressed the point of the knife against her left arm, just below the elbow, just enough to sting, just enough to shock her system into staying conscious. The sharp pain shot up her arm, and suddenly her vision cleared. The drowsiness lifted for a moment. "What are you doing?" Mary asked, seeing the knife in Harriet's hand. "Staying awake," Harriet replied simply. "We need to move faster. The dogs are getting closer." But even as she said it, she could feel the sleep trying to take hold again. The knife trick had bought her maybe 5 minutes. She needed a better plan. That's when she remembered something her grandmother had told her years ago. Sometimes, the only way to win is to change the game completely. Harriet turned to face the group. In the pale moonlight, she could see their frightened faces looking back at her. Samuel with his worried frown, Mary holding Sarah tighter, Ruth with one hand on her belly, the other clutching her shawl. These weren't just escaped slaves to her, they were family. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. But if we're going to survive this night, you need to know the truth." The group gathered closer, sensing something important was coming. A branch cracked somewhere behind them. "I've got a condition," Harriet continued, "from when I got hit in the head years back. Sometimes I fall asleep, and I can't control it. It's happening now." Footsteps. Getting closer. "I'm fighting it, but I don't know how much longer I can stay awake." The silence that followed was deafening. She could see the fear creeping into their eyes. Without her, they were lost. Literally lost. None of them knew these woods. None of them knew which direction led to safety and which led straight back to the plantations.
"But here's what we're going to do," Harriet said before panic could set in. "Samuel, you're the strongest. If I fall unconscious, you carry me. Don't leave me behind, but don't stop moving either. Mary, you know the North Star?" Mary nodded nervously. "Keep it on your right shoulder. That'll keep us heading northwest toward the safe house. Ruth, you and the boys take turns helping Thomas. We're going to move faster than we've ever moved before, because those dogs aren't going to wait for us to figure this out." Another bark echoed through the trees, definitely closer now. "What if you don't wake up?" asked one of the teenage boys, David. Harriet looked at him with fierce determination. "Then you keep going without me. You follow that star, you stick together, and you don't stop until you reach Pennsylvania. You hear me? Don't stop for anything." But even as she gave them instructions, she could feel her eyelids growing heavy again. The knife wound on her arm had stopped bleeding, and the pain was fading. The sleep was coming back, stronger than before. She needed something more drastic. Without warning, Harriet knelt down in the snow and grabbed a handful of the icy crystals. She pulled off her hat and pressed the snow directly against her scalp, letting the freezing water run down her neck and back. The shock was immediate and intense. Her body jerked awake. Her breathing became sharp and fast. "Moses," Samuel reached out to help her, but she waved him away. "It's working," she gasped, standing up with snow still melting in her hair. "The cold is working. Samuel, pack snow in your hands. If you see me getting drowsy again, dump it on my head. Don't ask permission, just do it." Samuel nodded grimly, understanding the stakes. They started moving again, faster now. Harriet set a brutal pace, using the urgency to keep herself alert. Every few minutes, when she felt the drowsiness creeping back, Samuel would dump fresh snow on her head or neck. The shock would jolt her awake, but each time it seemed to work a little less than before. The dogs were definitely getting closer. She could hear them clearly now, their excited barking as they followed the scent trail. Behind the dogs she could make out voices, male voices, calling to each other through the woods. The slave catchers were confident they were closing in. Morrison was almost on them. That's when little Sarah started to cry. It wasn't loud, just a soft whimpering, but in the quiet forest it might as well have been a bell announcing their location. Mary tried to comfort her, but the child was cold, hungry, and scared. She didn't understand why they were walking through the dark woods, why her mama was so frightened, why everyone kept looking over their shoulders. "Shh, baby," Mary whispered desperately. "Please, Sarah, you have to be quiet." But Sarah's crying got louder. She was only 3 years old, and she'd reached her limit. Harriet felt the sleep trying to take her again. Just as their biggest crisis hit, the dogs would hear Sarah's cries and come straight for them. But if Harriet passed out now, who would make the impossible decisions that might save them? She stumbled slightly, catching herself on Marcus's shoulder. The boy looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Moses, you're falling asleep," he whispered. Harriet knew he was right. She could feel consciousness slipping away like water through her fingers. But before the darkness could take her, she had one last idea, a desperate, dangerous idea that went against every instinct she had. "Samuel," she said urgently, "take my gun." She handed him the pistol she always carried, the one she'd never had to use on a person but always threatened to use on anyone who tried to turn back. "If I fall unconscious," she continued, "you carry me. No matter what, you drag me if you have to, but nobody gets left behind. That's an order." "I won't leave you," Samuel said firmly. "We don't abandon anyone. That's what you taught us." "Then you better hope I can stay awake," Harriet replied. She pressed more snow against her face, feeling the icy water run down her cheeks. The cold was helping, but her body was fighting back harder now. Every muscle felt heavy. Her thoughts were getting foggy. She was losing the battle. The barking was so close now that they could hear individual dogs, not just a general sound of pursuit. Maybe 2 or 3 animals, getting excited as they closed in on their prey. And then Sarah's crying stopped. Not because Mary had comforted her, but because the child had finally fallen asleep in her mother's arms, exhausted by fear and cold. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the crying had been. Now they could hear everything, the dogs panting as they ran, the men calling to each other, the crack of branches as the hunting party moved through the forest. Harriet's vision started to blur again. This time the snow wasn't enough, the cold wasn't enough. Her body had reached its absolute limit, and sleep was coming whether she wanted it or not. Morrison's dogs had found them, but sometimes when you're out of options, the impossible becomes possible. The dogs burst through the trees behind them, their eyes reflecting moonlight. Through the trees ahead, Harriet saw something that made her heart leap. A light, not the flickering torches of the slave catchers behind them, but a steady warm glow from a window. They were close to the safe house, closer than she'd thought. There, she whispered, pointing ahead. The light. We're almost there. The group looked where she was pointing and saw it too. Hope flashed across their faces for the first time in hours, but the dogs were so close now that they could hear their heavy breathing. Morrison's men were close enough that Harriet could hear them breathing too, and Harriet's consciousness was hanging by a thread. Run, she said simply. What? Samuel asked. I said run, all of you, I'll hold them off.
We're not leaving you, Mary said firmly. Harriet looked at these 11 people who'd followed her through hell, and she made a decision that went against everything she'd ever believed about leadership. They had minutes left. Samuel, she said, if I pass out before we reach that house, you carry me, you drag me if you have to, nobody gets left behind. That's an order. Samuel's jaw was set hard. I understand, but it's not going to come to that. And that's when Harriet Tubman did the most courageous thing she'd ever done, not because she felt brave, but because she felt utterly helpless. She closed her eyes for a moment, said a quick prayer, and then pushed herself harder than she'd ever pushed before. They ran, all 12 of them, stumbling through the snow toward that precious light. Harriet fought the sleep with every step, using the rhythm of running to keep herself conscious. Behind them, the dogs burst through the tree line, their excited barking filling the night air. The safe house was 100 yards away, then 50, then 20. Time was up. That's when Harriet's body shut off like a light switch. She collapsed in the snow just 20 feet from the front door, her consciousness finally slipping away despite all her desperate efforts to stay awake. But Samuel was ready. Just like he'd promised, he scooped Harriet up in his arms and carried her those final 20 feet. The door opened before they even reached it. The people inside had heard the commotion and were waiting. All 12 of them made it inside. The door slammed shut behind them just as the first dog reached the yard. Harriet woke up 6 hours later on a soft bed, covered in warm blankets. Sunlight was streaming through a window, and the smell of breakfast was drifting up from downstairs. Her arms were bandaged where she'd cut herself, and someone had cleaned the blood from her face and hands. Samuel was sitting in a chair beside the bed, still wearing his coat. "Did we all make it?" were her first words. Samuel smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. "Every last one of us, Moses. Even little Sarah. She's downstairs eating pancakes like she's never seen food before." Harriet closed her eyes and felt tears of relief running down her cheeks. She'd done it again. 19 trips, now 20. Still hadn't lost anyone. "How long was I out?" she asked. "About 6 hours. The folks here said you were talking in your sleep. Kept saying don't leave anyone behind. Don't leave anyone behind." Harriet smiled weakly. Even unconscious, she was still trying to do her job. "Samuel," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When I collapsed out there, when it came down to choosing between saving me and getting everyone else to safety, what were you planning to do?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I was going to carry you, just like I did, because you taught us something more important than just how to escape slavery. You taught us what it means to be family, and family doesn't leave family behind, no matter what." Later that morning, when Harriet finally felt strong enough to go downstairs, she found all 11 of her travelers gathered around the kitchen table. They looked different in the daylight, rested, hopeful, free. Little Sarah ran up to her and wrapped tiny arms around her legs. "Moses lady," Sarah said in her small voice, "Mama says you were sick but you didn't leave us." Harriet knelt down to the child's level, ignoring the pain in her bandaged arms. "That's right, sweetheart. I was sick but I had help from good friends, and we all made it together, didn't we?" Sarah nodded solemnly, then whispered, "Are we really free now?" Harriet looked around the table at all the faces watching her. Samuel the blacksmith, Mary the mother, old Thomas with his aching joints, the teenage brothers Marcus and David, Ruth with her unborn child, and all the others who'd trusted her with their lives. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "We're really free now." That night, alone in her room, Harriet wrote in her journal, February 18, 1854, 20 successful trips. My condition nearly cost us everything. Learned something important. Heroes don't win because they never fall. They win because they get carried when they do. She never spoke publicly about that night, about how close they'd all come to disaster because of her narcolepsy, but she never forgot the lesson either. On her final rescue missions over the years that followed, she always made sure to have backup plans, backup leaders, backup routes. She never again let herself be the only one who knew the way home, and she never stopped believing that the most important promise you can make is this: no one gets left behind. Years later, when the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, Samuel would tell his grandchildren about the night Moses collapsed but wouldn't let go, about how sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is teach others to be leaders too. That's the real story of Harriet Tubman's most dangerous night. Not just about staying awake, but about trusting others to carry you when you can't carry yourself. Now I need to know, if you were Samuel that night, what would you have done when Harriet collapsed? Type 1, if you'd carry her no matter what. Type 2, if you'd prioritize saving the group. Be honest, no lying, lives depended on that choice. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories of American courage. Thank you for watching.